So we've got a panel that we're just going to finish up with to see whether anybody has any questions for any of the speakers that we've had. So if the speakers would just like to come up and grab a seat, I think hopefully we've got enough.
Yeah, thanks. That was really great. I was really curious about the product development versus like revenue, like growth internationally, and how you balance between those. Probably yourself on the CTO sort of CPO side. How do you like manage that? You sort of mentioned like agile working, but you've got an existing market that you're trying to develop for here, and you've got new markets that you're trying to develop for internationally. And everybody pretty much spoke about the difference in like how you approach those markets. So how do you sort of balance that?
Yeah, great. So the question is just how do we balance the product workload, I suppose, across those different markets? And we aren't fully in those markets yet, so it's probably too early to say exactly how we're going to do that. But I would say our teams are all oriented around value areas. So rather than saying we have a Canterbury team or a Waikato team or a owner-operator team or a corporate team, is really around the value streams. And so things for us, for example, is pasture. We have a pasture team. We have a behaviour team that works on animal behaviour. We have a guidance team that works on the virtual fencing and the shifting piece. And that is universal. We think those things are our jobs to be done. I don't know if you know the jobs to be done framework, but those are the jobs that we are being hired to do as a company, and those jobs should be fairly universal across our customer base. Obviously, there's differences in the different regions, and we'll explore those. And certainly with the move to Canterbury and the more kind of upmarket corporate approach, we had to reflect that in our teams, but it's still around those value pillars, and that's how we do it. I'd be interested in Andrew's view on this, because I was really keen on the idea of having a product engineering development team in each region. So actually, that was my question for you, Andrew, around how that worked.
Yeah, and thanks, mate. And what I would say there is it's not a product and development team for that region, and I think we've actually tried to actively avoid that. We probably got into the bad habit of saying, oh, well, we're going to do a feature for the UK, then we'll do a feature, and this especially happened with us in terms of integrations. So we would like partner with the Afterpay of the UK and then Afterpay in APAC, and then and that was not the best thing actually from a strategic point of view. When I'm talking about kind of that growth, what we're doing right now quite nicely is we've got some of our product and engineering teams. So when there is a product and engineering team, they are all co-located in the same place, but you might have teams in different areas. So we've, for example, got a lot of our trading and e-com and those types of teams in New Zealand. All of our hardware teams, for example, are in North America and those things as well. So it's not doing a bit for everyone. You've got to have that really strategic mindset and saying, where are our priorities as a company, and let's do that stuff there. But I love having that kind of that feedback loop between product and go-to-market and region as well.
Anyone else?
Thanks. Thank you. First, I just want to say thanks to the panel. It's been an awesome series of presentations, really took a lot out of it. I've got a question for Ian. I come from kind of Andrew's data-driven marketing kind of background. That's been my career, really. And so recently within our SaaS business, I've got responsibility for pricing now. How do we look at how pricing and our product bundling is performing, and how do we iterate and test it and, to your point, drive more value? But I think one of the things that's come up really immediately for us has been, how would you advise people start to do that when you've got a reasonable sized customer base already? We've got people who aren't very active customers. We don't necessarily want to go and talk to them about price, because that might be the, oh shit, yeah, I'm not really using that, I might cancel at moment. The insurance industry deals with that all the time. And really it was just like, what's your advice on how you iterate and test price? How do you interact with your existing customer base around that?
Thanks.
So the first thing that I'd recommend is that you identify some segments that would represent essentially your customer needs across the spectrum, and then experiment with subsets of your customer base, and that will give you some really good intel. The second thing that I would recommend is conjoint analysis, which is essentially it's choices. So you put up different combinations at different price points, and that will tell you a lot about two things: the importance of different features, but it will also tell you about how sensitivity to price changes. And so that's a really good starting point, I would say, if you're looking to understand better.
Any other questions? Scotty.
Yeah, really enjoyed that. Thanks, thanks everyone. We've seen companies going into new markets, send the best salesperson from New Zealand. Good luck. I know you don't know much about the market, but let's see how you go. You were good here. Versus hiring in market. Can you just comment on perhaps, I know you've touched on it, Fallon, but any other experiences or advice or things to watch out for when doing that?
Multiple advice around this, I'd imagine. Do you want to start, Val, and then we can go to Andrew?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the outcomes are that you're trying to achieve. Like, I think sending someone that you trust, understands the culture, understands your product, that to me is you're sending them over to kind of bring back findings. It's not about exponential growth at that point. Whereas when you're doubling down in a region, you're getting experienced people to then hopefully double down on whatever's working. So what worked with that best sales performer that they can then immerse and spread through the rest of the organisation. I find that's kind of like the highest level of how to make sure that you're taking what works in New Zealand and taking it offshore is kind of my main thing. And so it's quite tactical in a sense, because you're able to get those findings about what's working from a product perspective, what's working from a messaging perspective, what's landing, all of those things. But definitely the idea of sending your best salesperson over there, here's a massive target, you got it, that doesn't land well, right? Anything to add?
No, that's a guess. That's a stunning answer. That's right. It's a cultural play. It's not a scale play. And I think you've had that experience, and it's
Definitely had the pressure on me to get those targets. Yeah.
Thanks. Kia ora, I'm Luke from Orchestra.io. Thanks very much for all the sessions, really helpful. Can I do two questions? Two for one? Totally. Perfect. So my first one is to Simon and maybe Fallon as well. Simon, you talked about the challenger attitude of salespeople. I was just keen to unpack what that means, what that would feel like when you're interacting with that person, or how you know that they fit that. And Fallon, maybe you have a similar experience around recruiting and sales. And then my second question was for Andrew, just going a bit deeper within the APAC region, those different methods of, I don't know what you call it, but the different call to actions, whether it's a demo or a phone call. I can't remember what the other one is now. But are there any differences between APAC regions, even like Australia and New Zealand? What's your experience? Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Luke. Okay, we'll start with Simon and pass it along.
Cool. Thank you for your questions. The Challenger Sell model is something I'm only peripherally aware of. I'm not a salesperson, so forgive me if on the video I get this wrong, Charlie. But the idea is moving away from this tell sell, where we have this list of features and you sit down with a potential customer and say, look at all these great things, aren't they good? Can you? Yeah, exactly. Sharp and throw up. Fantastic. Exactly. So it's quite, there's a definite audience for that, and I think some folks would respond to that. The Challenger Sell is the sort of inverse, which is really talking about the world in which the outcome is achieved, and almost saying, how dare you not accept that world by using our technology. It's almost quite a challenging confrontational selling approach, where you have this opportunity to unlock this value. How dare you not take that? It is quite a challenge, and hence the name. But it's working really, really well for us, and particularly for our customer segment, which are farmers who are used to pretty forthright, upfront conversations and no bullshit. They respond pretty well to this kind of like, yeah, fair enough. How dare I? Where do I sign?
Nicely done. Another way of looking at it is around like education, like when you really have to educate the market on what you're trying to achieve, right? So I think that's what's common in disruptors. You're going into a market, you're doing it, you're challenging the status quo, you're challenging how they do business. And so chucking a salesperson in there who may not present that well, or, how I don't necessarily respect your opinion. So it's making sure you're doing that in a really tactful way, and more about the education of why this better outcome is the way to go, and taking them on the journey. And that's not just from sales conversations, it goes back to the the positioning, it's how you communicate to the market and all of those things.
Just before you move on, Val, I think there's a really important point just to add there, because it's about when you're in a completely new category, like you are, Luke, and to some degree, and Halter is, you're effectively creating a category, right? And when you're creating a category, you've got to do a huge amount more around education of why this whole new way of doing things is going to revolutionise or change the world. So that goes back to that creating demand for a new category that almost can put you as brand, like the brand leader as well. So it's just kind of thinking about some of those things as well.
Just to add to what they said, the Challenger sale was a big focus for us at Salesforce, and we're obviously a much more mature sales organisation than a lot in the room. And there's actually a book called, no surprises, The Challenger Sale, which is worth a read. But like a big focus for us, especially when we're recruiting new staff as well, is can they form an opinion? Like, can they form a point of view on a particular industry or a particular account? Because then we can back that with the Challenger Sale and go into a fresh new customer and say, this is our opinion of what's happening within your industry. This is our opinion on what we can find with you as a customer. What's your buy? And this is how we're going to change it for you. You know, what's your buy into that? And we tend to find it works, for the most part, pretty well.
It's kind of interesting. There's been a little bit of a backlash against the Challenger model, just to put another point of view in, because it's a very provocative type approach. So I think, to Simon's point, it works really well with Kiwi farmers. They're good old blokes that probably, and girls that probably don't mind you coming in pretty bluntly and honestly. But what they're seeing is that a lot of the earlier stage Challenger sale companies, or that went and used that, they're seeing lifetime value has dropped off. Whereas, so it's taking that more of an insight-led approach. So absolutely bring in those insights. Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo, but do it in a way that, with transparency and making sure that you're building that, I guess, transparent, collaborative relationship with the customer would be the way that I would just slightly reposition it, than perhaps just that kind of provocative selling, which, I haven't sort of had a huge amount to do with Challenger over the last few years. So I would imagine they've evolved to some degree as well, because a lot of the studies were showing that lifetime value drop off compared to some kind of the more consultative insight-led approaches. But because these things sort of shift and change all the time. Do you want to answer?
What was the second question? Oh, yeah, sorry. So I guess a very quick answer is we did a little bit of work on it, and Australia and New Zealand in that case were quite similar. There are some things that they are different about when it comes to sales culture, but on that one they were close enough. The other thing I'd say is we didn't really care, and it's quite a big statement, but what we ended up doing was we were optimizing for our primary country in our 3 markets. So in APAC, we were optimizing for Australia. In North America, we were optimizing for the US. In EMEA, we were optimizing for the UK. And in each of those, we had a big secondary market, whether that's New Zealand, Canada, or South Africa, which we would still kind of think about, but it wasn't necessarily what our engineers were thinking about, what our sales teams were thinking about on a day-to-day basis as well. So, yes, it was the same conveniently. If it wasn't, I don't know how much it would have necessarily changed our strategy to between those 2 markets.
Any other questions? I'm just going to finish off with one question that I think I get asked quite a lot, and it's a problem that I've grappled with myself as CRO or leading all of the sales and marketing in an organisation, and that is that there's a point when you start that all of marketing is in head office, which for Kiwi companies is in New Zealand. So your marketing team is here. And then you're starting to grow into other countries, and I think Lightspeed or Vend would be probably more ahead of this than anyone else, but possibly timely. At what point are you starting to hire local marketing, and at what point do you actually give them we saw this at Xero, guys gone I can see, but where the local regions were going, we need our own whole marketing team. That HQ from New Zealand just doesn't support us or doesn't understand local marketing enough. And just perhaps hearing, when is the point where you start to need to hire some local marketing? Just any thoughts on that? Because I think, in terms of the whole scaling journey, it's not, it's not always easy to know when. Perhaps you have not encountered that yet, but yeah.
Share. For me, I would say with marketing, it's almost at the very beginning to have someone on the ground that can be that representative around the positioning piece. And so that's usually what looks like your, Australia marketing manager. So you'd still have that, hopefully, that global marketing engine that person can then feed into and be the voice of the region. And then eventually, over time, you'd love to provide them with more support. And it all depends on what channels are working for that region. So if it's highly digital, then you don't need to probably have somebody in market. If it's more local area targeted marketing, so you're out there in the community, then totally you need those people on the ground. So it totally depends, I think, on your channel to market. But I'd say as soon as you get someone that can be that person, be that voice to what works and what doesn't work in region.
Yeah.
That's kind of my...
Yeah, I'd agree. I think for performance marketing or growth marketing, I still believe in that kind of centralised proposition there with really clear input from the regions. So 75% of the strategy or 80% of the strategy is consistent regardless of place. And then you're getting direct feedback from sales teams or local marketers to say, hey, these are the key integrations we're selling. These are the things that we're kind of seeing in market to refine that. It's kind of what you want to drive, right? So, the thought of field marketing, whether that's events or positioning or those things, I think they come when you need it. And sometimes that's really easy if you've got more of a brand, event, PR, comm strategy where you do need that local piece. If it is a more digital-led approach, then it's probably something that can come later. But it's really horses for courses around what you need from marketing, and then whether that needs to be an in-person thing or whether it can be something that can kind of be driven centrally as well.
Glad we're aligned.
I have one anecdote I can share.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
nothing to do with hiring, because we haven't hired marketing folk outside of Auckland, although most of our marketing team spends most of the time on the road with customers. But we did make a bit of a mistake when we launched in Canterbury. Obviously, if you've been to our website, you'll see lots of photos like I showed in the slides. They're all photos from our customers' farms and the virtual fencing lines and everything else, all the feature benefits. We got to Canterbury and they're like, why are there all these hills in your videos? We don't have any hills at all down here. And so we actually ran into some, just market. We weren't putting their picture in front of as part of the sales process. So, definitely use local content, if nothing else.
Yeah. That's a really, really good point. Very good point. Any other final questions just before we wrap up?
The last quick one.
Yeah, sure.
We've talked quite a lot about scaling revenue and getting our message out to market, but does anyone have any good tips for scaling listening as you grow to both your employees and your customers? Because that needs to grow almost at the same rate, right, to stay relevant in new markets.
Listening.
Nice.
Yeah, nice. Great question.
Just... Yeah, I think this is a cultural piece, and I think this is around the rigor of your operating model. So when are you, some key things that we've implemented is around the voice of the customer, and so it's really making deliberate milestones of, okay, each quarter, each month, whatever it is, what are we doing to make sure that we're elevating our voice of the customer? And so if you've got really good processes and rigor internally to promote that, then it hopefully will help with the active listening part. But I totally sympathise with the challenge. It's definitely one of those things that as you scale, it gets harder and diluted, right? Anyone want to add to that? That was a tricky one.
Yes, I definitely agree on the processes part, but I also think CRM is quite a big part, and any customer touch point, so that could be a sales conversation or whatever, capturing that feedback is absolutely key.
Yeah, and if I just add a little bit on that as well, is just around deep qualitative insights. And I think that's super important in terms of sales and marketing. So it's going out, and if you don't, thinking about the buyer journey and mapping that out, and if you don't know what that is, get out and talk to a customer. They're only too happy to share what they go through and give you great qualitative insights, which then inform not only your sales approach, but also obviously marketing and messaging and things like that. And I think we don't do enough of that. So when Simon said his marketing marketing team are on the road most of the time with customers, that is gold. Like, that is absolute gold, because they're going to get all those qualitative insights that can then inform the approach they take to marketing. So I'd really encourage that, because I've seen a lot of companies just marketing isn't getting out and talking to the customers enough. Any other final questions before we wrap up? Okay, so thank you all for coming. We've had, and thank you for such a great contribution to all of our speakers. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to every one of you, and stuff that, I've been in this game for a long, long time, so you can tell by the wrinkles. But it's, I always learn something new. I always love to kind of learn and listen to other people's stories. So it's really inspired me. I hope it's helped inspire you. And feel free to, if you want to stay around, you've got a few minutes to stay around. Some of our speakers might be able to stay for a few minutes and answer any other questions that you have. But thank you so much for coming. I know we've gone a bit over, and have a great rest of your day.